Meanwhile, let's go across to Rajan Matthews from the Cellular Operators Authority of India, COAI. Good afternoon, Mr. Matthew, and thanks so much for joining in. Well, finally, it appears that the Telecom Commission has approved the spectrum sharing as well as the trading norms, and it will now be sent to the Cabinet for approval by June and earliest July. Your initial comments?
So we're very glad that finally this is ending the finish line. We've been waiting for quite a while. It did get referred back to TRAI. TRAI reaffirmed its original recommendations, and so we're hoping that the final recommendations as made by the TRAI will be what is ultimately approved by Cabinet, and industry is waiting eagerly so that we can proceed with the outcomes of those guidelines.
Okay. Mr. Matthew, just for the benefit of our viewers, if you can tell us, from the TRAI recommendations, which will be the biggest, the most important recommendations of, spectrum sharing and trading? Will this be an incremental positive for the telecom industry, or do you see it a game changer?
I think initially it will be a bit incremental insofar as TRAI has indicated that both on the sharing side and on the trading side, there are issues like how much is the maximum amount of spectrum that you have to cap this at, what are the terms and conditions when you share versus trading. Trading obviously has issues about ownership changes. Sharing does not have issues of actually ownership changing. But the biggest benefit that will come to the industry is that once you allow spectrum sharing, a couple of things happen. One is that you can aggregate spectrum, which is today very split up by many operators. This allows operators to gather together contiguous spectrum, which is absolutely essential for offering 3G and 4G services. So it helps in that way forward. This whole controversy about the 3G ICR, which is the spectrum trading that went on previously, that was taken to court, that whole issue hopefully goes away as a result of the sharing and trading coming into practice. In addition, it also will ultimately allow for what we call active infrastructure sharing. Today, if you look at our cell towers, we only share the passive elements. That's the tower and some other elements. Now, with this being introduced, we also have additional efficiencies that can come into the telecom industry by allowing for active infrastructure sharing, which is the BTS sharing as well. So this would be definitely helpful, though a bit incremental, but I think it's a fairly good step forward.
All right, Mr. Matthews, could you give us a sense of the quantum of that incremental benefit in terms of perhaps the margins or increase in passengers or increase in the number of subscribers?
So I think incrementally, if you look, it's a little difficult to say right now because it will ultimately depend on who is willing to share with whom and who gets the final spectrums together. Right now, as you know, as a result of the March spectrum auctions, there's been a reallocation of some of the 900, 1800 that were being held by incumbents, and so there's been a little bit of this reallocation. So we'll have to wait till all of that settles down. Ultimately, then we'll have an understanding as to what can get pooled and shared and traded. And so then, of course, then we'll have to also understand what is the benchmark price and the commercial arrangements under which the sharing and trading will take place. Those are the next steps, and obviously operators have not fully understood what those terms and conditions will be, and we will have to wait for additional clarification from the DoT in terms of what are the terms and conditions ultimately that will govern spectrum sharing and trading. So even though that decision will be made, it will take a while because we also have to conform to the Companies Act, because some of the Companies Act regulations and stipulations will also have to be looked at in terms of market share and market power, and all of these types of matters will also have to be looked in terms of consolidations and M&A activity that might have questions regarding the aggregation of spectrum and the trading, and those factors might kick in.
Okay. Yes, we are awaiting more clarity on the terms and conditions which are attached to these sharing and trading norms. But do you think this will benefit the incumbent players more, or will it be more beneficial for, some of the smaller players?
I think it will benefit both players, because remember, because at the present 25% cap, the larger operators will probably be hurt more than the smaller operators. So clearly, in the larger context, the smaller operators will have more of headroom to go through the sharing and aggregation and trading, because they will not bump into this 25% cap that is presently recommended by TRAI. So if you want to go above that, then you've got to go through the whole competitive, anti-competitive act, and all of those matters have to be taken into consideration. So clearly, in most circles, the larger boys will kind of find it a little difficult because of the headroom, and the smaller operators will have more leeway. Also, what happens is that some of the smaller operators that may have fragmented spectrum can begin to start looking at perhaps sharing that or trading it to some of the larger incumbents, provided they don't cross that cap, so they can monetize some of the assets that they may presently not being able to use to the full extent. So that's a benefit to them.
Right. So how do you think will the industry be able to move itself towards the contours, not nudging into the walls of the Competition Act, considering two large players can perhaps come and share their spectrum in one circle, perhaps indicating some sort of a monopoly or dominant share in the market?
So I think the present guidelines indicate that you cannot have more than 25% of the total spectrum in any circle, and not more than 50% of the spectrum within a band. So suppose you have 900, you can't have more than 50% of the total spectrum available for 900. And in the aggregate between, say, 800, 900, 1800, 21, 23, put it all together, then you can't have more than 25% of that total pool. So clearly what's going to happen as a result of that, again, the larger players will have not as much headroom, and the smaller players, again, as I said, will be able to probably bundle together the spectrum, and they will be able to offer that and perhaps go forward. So again, I think that anti-competitive factor will kick in at that 25%, and that's why 25% is there, because if you look at the sort of analysis that has been done globally, it has been shown that you really don't need more than 4 operators to offer a completely competitive environment, and that's been proven even in America, where you don't have any more than 4 operators, and in most countries you don't have more than 4 or 5 operators.
Okay. You indicated that, the street is still awaiting some more clarity. Does that mean that we're unlikely to see any sharing and trading, happen between two players, at least in the next 1 year, till, all the smaller issues get ironed out? When do you expect, operators to start actually sharing and trading?
I think 1 year might be a too long a period.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think first of all what will happen is that we will get clarity in terms of the recommendations. So all we know right now is that the TRAI has made certain recommendations. What the final form of the actual guidelines, we don't know for sure. So ultimately we'll have to wait. So that if that takes 2 months, I would say it will take another 3 months or so for companies to start looking at what the financial terms and conditions and what are the bilateral agreements that will happen to take place. There's also some notification, there's some permissions that have to be also obtained from the DOT and perhaps a Wireless Planning Commission in terms of notification. So that will probably take another 90 days. So at the very earliest, I think it will be about 6 months or maybe 4 months from the date that the cabinet makes its final decision. It'll probably take another 3 to 4 months from that for beginning to see some activity in terms of sharing and trading.
So would it be reasonable to then assume that the benefits of this on the finances of the company will accrue only by FY17?
So you should expect to say that by the 4th quarter of this year, you should begin to expect to see some activity, some indications as to what is happening. And so some companies that might be more urgently requiring the type of spectrum might be willing to undertake those activities quicker, those commercial arrangements quicker. So they will, perhaps want to be quicker to the starting block there. So I would say that towards the end of this year, you should begin to see some activity, provided that in the next 30 to 60 days, Cabinet is willing to make its decision.
All right, Mr. Mathew, appreciate you taking out your time and sharing your perspective. So that's the big news for the telecom operators, that the Telecom Commission has approved and finalized the spectrum sharing and trading norms. This will now be sent forth to the Cabinet, where we're expecting an approval by June end or early July. And this will be an incremental positive for the industry, for the smaller players as well as for the larger players.